Oh, hi, Kameale. Can you hear us okay? Perfect. Okay. So kick us off, so electrification. So we heard in the introduction some of the big trends, this kind of bifurcation in the market. We talked about that. China at 50% EVs, US 1 out of every 10, EU 1 out of every 5. These new headwinds that we're seeing with electricity prices increasing, downward pressure on gas prices. And we talked importantly about battery technology and where we are with that, where China is with that as well. So I want to start with you, Will. So you have, first tell us a little bit about your company. I find this really fascinating. So you've built an electric vehicle company around a kind of smart motor. And that's pretty amazing. I mean, tell us the motivation, give us a little bit of the story there.
Sure. Thank you, John. And for indiGO Tech, we actually started out as a hard tech company that, based on the technology born out of MIT from Professor Ian Hunter, called Smart Wheels. And I got involved first as an investor, then as a board member. Then I saw that this technology has a way of transforming the next generation of electric vehicles, whether they're small, medium, or large, because fundamentally we're changing the propulsion and the movement of the technology, movement of the vehicles, to have a robotic smart wheel in each corner that not only spins the wheel in propulsion laterally, but also have a vertical actuator. So 2 degrees of freedom in each corner, meaning 5 degrees of freedom in the entire vehicle. But more importantly, not only is this creating a safer and a more smooth magic carpet ride type of experience that you've seen in the Neo ET9 and the BYD active suspension that actually came out of MIT as well.
So MIT technology.
Yeah.
Yes.
In fact, my former professor, Dr. Bose. But that technology, in fact, what it also does is it frees up all that usable cabin space in between the wheels and creates a very low flat floor, whereas today all the axles and vehicle chassis are so high up that when you're loading products, loading packages, loading people, you have to take those extra steps up. And when you're dealing with one of our investors, for example, FedEx, who invested in us recently after we showed them how this vehicle works, they have to load 17 million packages onto trucks and vans every single day. And then the drivers have to then unload them 200 stops per day. So if you imagine having to go an extra 400 millimeters per step, per package, that's like an equivalent of 30 flights of steps every single day. And if we have a low flat floor, not only is it more ergonomic, not only is it safer, but it enables also wheelchair access. It enables a low flat floor, which allows you to have chairs and seats move forward and back for multiple use, not only carrying humans, delivering humans, but also delivering packages and food. So that level of efficiency, I started from first principles of this smart wheel technology. And at first, we thought that it was just
sell it, though. Why not just sell it to the vehicle manufacturers?
Same question. We had that same principle, which was Intel Inside. We just build the chips, and everybody else will adopt it. Well, as it turns out, you guys can probably guess that vast majority of OEMs are not going to change their chassis. They're not going to rebuild an entire vehicle for something that is not yet on the road. And in China, there's an old saying of who's going to be the first to eat crabs. So we said, you know what? We're going to die on the vine waiting for an OEM to do this. So we decided to eat crabs ourselves first. So, and not only are we going to eat crabs, or we're going to make it so delicious that other people want to eat it too. But what we've discovered was that as we're bringing this technology out into market, just like the earlier panelists talked about, it's not just the hardware itself. It's also the software. But beyond the software, there is how do you apply the hardware and the software into services for a community? Because it's not efficient for everybody to be building their own vehicles, everybody to also set up their own charging stations, everybody to create their own autonomous fleet to maintain and repair. And there's this transition towards autonomy, and there's inevitable human-driven miles are going to be vast majority of miles for the next 5 years, and then maybe over 10 to 15 years that evolution happens. So we started to think that, hey, you know what? As we're looking at the EVs themselves with smart wheel technology, we need to think about the rest of the system, and we need to think about our customers. We need to think about the communities. And what we figure that the most efficient system will ultimately win. And so I started taking trips over to China. I just came back from China last week. And sure enough, we are working with some of the top tier supply chains, top tier design houses that want to build this technology. In fact, China is more hungry for our smart wheels technology than the US OEM.
Right. We're back to this ecosystem question, which I think is going to come up again. Deeply concerning, though, right? I mean, it's a great technology. It's fundamentally redesigning the architecture of the vehicle, and yet it's met with sort of resistance and I don't want to go first. I don't want to eat those crabs first.
I'm going to add one more thing, which I think it bears considering. As we evolve into this market of delivering this first smart wheel technology and smart wheel powered EVs, sets of EVs for our customers like FedEx and Uber and others, what we are seeing is that, in fact, FedEx said this to us last week when we were having a conference call, and they said, you know what, we have a road to electrification. And part of that road to electrification is that if you may have the best EVs, but if you don't have the charging solved for our fleets, it's a barrier. So the charging side is actually either a barrier or an enabler. So for those reasons, we actually acquired one of the leading charging companies in America called EverCharge. Right. And SK became a partner of ours to now deliver not only smart EVs, smart charging, but we're now launching also smart mobility services, starting here in Woburn and also out in California soon. And we see that by taking a holistic approach, we can solve these transport problems and smart mobility problems.
Right. Excellent. Well, we're definitely going to talk more about charging. Henrik, so you are at Prologis, which is, I believe, the world's largest operator, owner of warehouses and other logistics-related facilities. And you are working on charging, but more charging for big fleets. So tell us a little bit about some experience that you've had with Prologis, for example, in Torrance.
Sure. Thank you, John. And indeed, Prologis is the world's largest publicly traded REIT. We have some roots that go back to MIT as well. The company was founded by Moavenzadeh, and there's a building here somewhere with his name on it. So we operate in 19 different countries. To give you an idea of what logistics real estate means, it's a fancy way of saying warehouses and large paved lots. I joined the company 4 years ago to spearhead our EV charging. I renamed it to mobility the moment I joined the company, because we were looking at things like hydrogen as well. That has kind of taken a bit of a step back. But our impetus of starting this business has really been twofold. One is that we saw an increasing need that our customers had to electrify warehouses for the fleets that they were transitioning to EVs at those locations. So think about your personal car charging experience. You either charge at home or you charge on the road. Many of the initial logistics use cases for EV are kind of domiciled charging. And a really important component of this transition is then the real estate side of this. And we talk a lot about the vehicles and the technology, but as it comes to making the thing come full circle, the real estate and the infrastructure side of this is really, really key. So that was one driver. Secondly, was really a recognition that in the transition to electrified transportation, that real estate is really critical, and that when you are building and developing real estate logistics assets, you have a lot of the capabilities that are required to also develop more advanced electrical smart infrastructure, not just at those warehouses, but also at dedicated charging hubs. So that's kind of the second thing that we do, is that we electrify industrial outdoor storage locations, think again large paved lots, into dedicated charging hubs for either last mile delivery vehicles, short haul heavy duty electric trucks, or, as we were talking about before, autonomous vehicles. So think about the locations where the Waymos need to go to charge up. So we focus on that as well. So according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, they released a report earlier this year. We have quietly become the second largest operator of commercial EV charging infrastructure in the country. Prologis is the second largest operator of commercial rooftop solar in the country. So I'm saying that not to brag or anything like, but just to point out the importance of real estate and that infrastructure as part of this conversation. As we transition, especially logistics fleets, we cannot solely rely on public charging infrastructure. And I think we're going to talk about reliability of that in a bit. This infrastructure needs to be extremely reliable and industry grade in order for the transition to happen well.
Excellent. I think that actually that's a great segue to Kameale. So, we teach a class here about entrepreneurship in transportation systems, and always making the point: focus on the customer, focus on the problem, don't focus on the solution. Don't focus on your great technology first. And I think, Kameale, that's a little bit of your story. You saw a problem. You saw a real problem with the reliability of the public charging network in the US, and you said, okay, we're going to go and fix this. So tell us a little bit, first, in 1 minute about ChargerHelp, and then importantly, the report that you guys published where you're looking at that reliability of the US public charging network.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, perfect. Well, listen, I'm joining y'all from Belize on my last day of vacation, but I could not miss being a part of this event. And just one quick fact about Belize, they just launched their first electric bus here in the city, and I'm not too far away from some DC fast chargers. So it's pretty incredible to see electrification in my parents' home country of Belize. But to John's point, I got obsessed with charging about 10 years ago. I'm from South Central Los Angeles, for folks who don't know, and I live in a community where, pollution and all of this is not just or electrification isn't just like a nice to have. We connect it back to health, right? To what we breathe in our environment. And so charging was really, as I learned more about charging and electrification, it became even more and more important to me that this was something that we needed to move forward on. And then when I learned about, how charging stations are systems, right? These are smart assets. These are IoT assets. And today in our industry, we listen to, a real estate organization that is the largest charge point operator, but I'm sure they're not making software or hardware. So you have a very fragmented system that is deploying infrastructure that requires folks to really work together. And so at ChargerHelp, we do a lot of work around reliability. We do a lot of work of understanding, not just from interoperability software, times when things fail, but if you take a step back, right, how should our system work, right? Like, who should be in control of what? And most importantly, if it is continuing to be fragmented, what must we agree on in order for us to actually be successful? I tell folks this all the time, the airlines that came together in order to create standardized safety mechanisms, right? And no one said that, oh yeah, like, I'm more safe of an airplane than you. Like, we all agree that we just believe airplanes should be safe. And looking at charging, I think that it continues to often bother me that, some folks say, oh, I'm more reliable. Like, no, we have to all figure out a way that we're all reliable, right? That should be the standard and the expectation. And so what I hope to chat with you all about, what we found out in the report, is really helping the organization, our industry, move forward in how you actually think about measuring these assets. When I first started in this industry, a lot of folks all said they were 99% uptime, but then folks were still stranded. We did a lot of work, with the EV Charging Association to create legislation around EV charging reliability to at least take a stab at coming up with a formula. But of course, we know that of course wasn't it. It isn't enough, and that's the uptime formula. In our report that we'll talk more about specifically, is that we see that yes, now we have this very interesting uptime standard, but it still doesn't correlate to what the end user is experiencing. And so the ChargeX Consortium earlier this year had came up with a report called Charge Start Success. And so in the report, we talk about the difference of uptime and Charge Start Success. And the last thing I'll say is where I hope to, which is one of the reasons why I love coming to this event, because it's a look back and a look forward. To me, the look forward needs to be first attempt Charge Start Success. And my colleagues may say, Kameale, you are crazy because I can only control what I can only control. And I said, of course. And that's why we have to figure out a standardized way to get to the first time I attempt to receive electrons from a unit as intended, it works. And it doesn't matter whose fault it is. If it doesn't work, it works. And so I think that's really what we're going to be measuring a lot of next year. But John, thank you so much for the time. And yeah, happy to get into the report once we get to that segment.
Okay, super. And I mean, just while we have you, Kameale, is there one sort of headline just from the latest report that you'd want to share?
Sure.
Is it that the right metric to look at maybe is charging success? Right? It's not so-called uptime. It's, am I really successfully able to extract electrons from this machine that I'm pulling my car up to?
Yes, I mean, yes. So I would say that the next metric for us to explore, because this is a new technology, right? I think that we do need to get to a space of essentially exploring further first attempt, right? So we talk about uptime, which is really about availability. So we would see that stations have actually hit, 93, 94% up. So it's available. When we start looking at charge start, so if I try to initiate a charge to receive electrons, it works. We're seeing about 71% of the time. But even in that numerical there, it's not the first attempt, right? And so what I'm really pushing us for 2026 is to figure out ways not only to measure, but to facilitate better first attempt, right? And so I guess the takeaway here is not necessarily the metric, it's how we should think about this industry moving forward as you bring more software into the built environment. As my colleague stated earlier, it's not just about the physical asset, and it's not just about the software. It is about the physical asset, the software, and the system that allows for it to exist. And so we need a big tent. I keep talking about this, like we need a big tent organization to help us figure out our business standards. We just need something for us to come together for the things that we cannot control, whether you're a hardware manufacturer, a real estate owner, autonomous car vehicle. There's certain things that you cannot control, but we all have to figure out a way to ensure that first attempt is successful. And to me, like, that's the key takeaway.
Excellent. Okay, and I'm always struck by how much this concept of like multiple stakeholders in this very big tent have to come together in a way to collaborate to really unlock value to deliver safe, clean, and inclusive mobility. I want to turn to you, Siyu. So you're a scientist. You studied at Cornell, and you have founded a battery company, Factorial Energy, which is in the solid state and quasi-solid state battery space. You have deals with some major OEMs, Mercedes, Stellantis, Hyundai, or at least agreements with them. Tell us a little bit. Where are we kind of in this, for people in this crowd who aren't like battery experts, and it's very confusing to speak about battery technology, but what is it that you think people need to understand about where we are in this journey toward developing better EV batteries?
Yeah, absolutely. It was great meeting you, John, in the IAA a few months ago, and thanks for inviting me to hear from that opportunity. And also honored to be in a panel with Bill and a few others and know each other as a neighbor for a while. So it's great to see this community coming together. So as John mentioned, I'm not as smart as many of you here. I'm not an MIT graduate, I'm a Cornell graduate. But we're very proud that actually one of our alumni brought us to here. So we started a company in Kendall Square. It was right across the road here in the CIC building. That was our first headquarters of the company. And as a battery maker, we wanted to build next generation high performance batteries with a lower cost for EVs. So that's our initial vision. And we started in 2015 as like Friday afternoon project, and we eventually got our first investment from Hyundai and Kia. And in 22, we closed our second round of financing that was led by Mercedes and Stellantis of $200 million into the company. And since then, we have made a lot of progress in blazing the trail for next generation batteries. Because like the challenge for the existing status quo for the batteries, number one is about the performance, like range, fast charging, and number two is about the cost, right? And those are the two major challenges for the global EV. And even like you just heard about the announcement, Ford is pulling back the Lightning, right? One of the top reasons for them is because of the cost. It's really not profitable. And how can we address this issue? So we decided to build a battery called solid-state battery, basically to swap out the liquid content in the battery and replace that with a solid. So you'll be able to make the system inherently safer compared with lithium-ion batteries. And you can also achieve a higher energy density by replacing different components into the high energy density components. So we're able to achieve at least 50 to 90% higher energy density compared with traditional lithium-ion batteries. And recently, we actually not only built the first large format solid-state battery, and it was the first 100 amp hour cell in the world, and we also built the first vehicle with Mercedes together. As of February this year, we launched the first EQS that was built with Factorial battery cell and into the vehicle, and we test drove on the street of Stuttgart. At that time, we promised to the world we'll target at least 1,000 kilometer drive. And as of last month, we were actually over-delivered. We actually achieved more than 1,205 kilometers, until also have 137 kilometer left in a vehicle. And that was a record drive for Mercedes, and also the record drive for the world, for every passenger vehicle, EV vehicle, not including hybrid. That doesn't count with the gas, but it was a world record and also on the street. So this was really, I would say, the future that we should target for. But also, I know the audience are curious about what is the reality, right? And like this is just one company, Factorial, working with another investor, Mercedes, to drive this momentum forward. But I totally agree with some of the panelists before that we needed the entire ecosystem to work together. We also have, for example, Stellantis. We're launching a fleet that we've already announced for next year that's going to be led by the Dodge Charger Daytona. And that's going to be a vehicle not only targeting longer range, but also with a lower cost, because that's a different concept. We have to build a lower cost and lower weight vehicle. In addition to that, I think with the entire ecosystem, especially with the current geopolitical environment, we have to ensure there's a robust supply chain there, because China, I think one of the panelists made a really good point before. Supply chain is really where the strength is. And we need to build a supply chain. We cannot be like the bowling frog, right? Just getting comfortable with all the accessible supply chain. Like China just announced last month, they're banning all of the high energy density batteries over 300 watt-hour per kilogram. To all around the world, they are having export control on all the high performance batteries. And that will be a huge leverage for them in negotiating anything else with us in the future. And batteries is not only just for mobility, for like EVs, but there's mobility in the air, in the water, for submarine, for drones, right? And even for AI and for robotics, humanoid in the future. That's the infrastructure technology, and it will be leveraged by so many things if we don't have a right battery ourselves.
So a couple things to unpack here. I mean, first on supply chain. So your point is we need to develop that supply chain and not be reliant on China for the graphite and the lithium and the materials that you need to make your battery. Do you see, like in 30 seconds, like sort of a way forward to push for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, technology innovation is definitely the key. Like for our batteries, we don't use graphite, as I know. We're compatible with graphite, but we don't have to use. So we're using lithium metal, and we can use silicon and different other materials. Also, like LFP is another very hot potatoes here. So we're not using LLP as our cathode material, so we can use NMC. So I think that's, in a lot of cases, we're diversified from those supply chain issues. And right now, we're also working with a lot of geopolitical partners and alliances around the world. Like recently, we announced a partnership with LG Chem as our supplier, and they also work closely with us to try to do co-development and produce some of the materials we had. We also had this partnership on recycling with Sunggil, which is a Korean conglomerate. They're doing various recycling for next generation batteries. So those are all the critical partnerships we're building together to mitigate the challenges. And I think on top of that, it's really coming down to how we're able to work together as a nation.
Yeah. Okay. I want to open it up to everyone for questions, but just maybe one last reflection here. So you got them to eat the crabs, maybe? I mean, it's sounding a little bit like that. And so what have you learned from working with these big automotive companies?
Very slow. I don't want to be painting a too rosy picture here. I would say they're really slow. And usually I heard, this is actually from a CTO and board member from one of the leading top 10 OEMs. He said, usually it takes us 3 to 4 years to have a new generation of platform. In China, it's every 9 months. And that's the reality I think everybody understands. And that's how they're able to iterate. And for us, I think EV is not going to be the first market we're entering in commercially. And we can either work with drones or even submarines, but it's not going to be EV. There's no way to be EV. And there are supercar companies that could be very interested to take a small fleet initially, but it's not going to be those, I don't want to call dinosaurs, but I cannot find a better word. So this is something like we just have to face the reality. I think Will made a really good point earlier. Like if you're just waiting for them, it's going to be doomed. There's no opportunity there.
And we're happy to actually use the technology that are in the forefront. We're currently looking at setting up manufacturing here in the United States for advanced manufacturing of our smart wheels technology and also the final assembly of our vehicles. And as long as we're focused on the customers themselves and getting demand, then we know that from a demand standpoint, there's going to be a sustainable train of vehicles. Then we're going to be sourcing to look at where can we source, and onshore and advanced technologies like Siyu's would certainly be top of the list for us, and especially if we're going to create a supply chain that comes from multiple areas of the world. We know we have to depend on various parts. And we're currently talking to LG as well, and of course SK is an investor of ours. So we're looking at different ways of dealing with the supply chain. But the most important thing is, as you mentioned earlier, which is how do we start from the customer's perspective and the community need perspective. So being a systemic level thinker, and whether you're talking about the hardware, the power supply, the software, or the charging. And for charging, as Kameale talked about earlier, she's more focused on the public charging. But for us, there's a huge demand for fleet and behind the fence charging for getting these transportation as a service and even autonomous vehicle fleets out on the road providing service. And for that, this is why inventions really matter. For EverCharge, we have this patented technology called Smart Power. So we certainly got the smart wheels patents, but Smart Power is all about taking whatever amperage is available for this site, and instead of, let's say if I have 200 amps, I only have 5 chargers, and that means I can only charge 5 vehicles overnight. But with Smart Power, I can charge 20, 25, 30. So that means for the same amount of power, overnight I can get my fleet out there. This is why UPS, Amazon, and others are using our charging.
Right. And to your point, Will, about the customer, I mean, what struck me when I saw your vehicle was, as you said, how low, by putting these motors in the wheels and using active suspension, you can lower the vehicle. It's fantastic for delivery. It's fantastic for wheelchair access and things like that. So it does unlock sort of new value for the customer. I want to ask a group here. on electrification. So we've covered a lot, right? We've covered across the intersection with real estate. We've covered, the smart wheel technology and how that enables new form factors for the vehicle, battery technology, and the charging infrastructure. Yes, Kameale.
Don, I just wanted to make one clarification. The data set that we're using is actually not public. So a lot of public stations, these are actually what we see, the interoperability issues we see hugely at fleet locations. And so like an example of this could be, we saw the other day a software provider push out firmware that bricked level 2 charging stations. Or we see firmware that is not being tested, released, and then all of a sudden a certain vehicle that is newer and maybe the hardware is older, and now that vehicle can no longer work on that station. So I just want to help us to all understand that this problem, because now we're seeing more interest from fleets, because we're actually starting to prove out actual business practices, this problem is going to wield its head very disastrously next year if we don't start getting our hands on just really it's IT business practices that we see that's lacked in the charging industry. So I just wanted to touch that because we don't work on public stations because people don't pay for O&M for public stations. So most of the assets, we have about 56 assets under management. Most of them are fleets behind the fence where people are utilizing these stations not because it's their business, but because they are using the electric vehicles because they think that they're going to get a reduction in total cost of ownership. And so that's why they switch to electric vehicles. But on the third truck roll, right, that savings is out the door because you can't figure out what type of issue is about. So I just wanted to level set that for everyone as well. It's really
Henrik,
important that we get our
reactions
hands
on
around
sort
this
of
stuff.
the importance of fleet charging?
Yeah, and couldn't agree more with Kameale. I think that the way that I have a bit of a telecoms background, and I think that there's really two main drivers to kind of what we're seeing in the kind of non-Tesla vertically integrated space, right? So what Tesla has done is, and they're doing this again in heavy duty, they're going to bring the Semi to market. It's going to come to market sometime next year or early 27. And because the industry hasn't really kept up with the megawatt charging standard, they're doing that themselves, and they cannot commit to having an open standards-based megawatt charging system work with their truck in 27, because they're going to be focused on making sure that the Tesla experience for truck drivers is primo, right? So it's going to be Tesla hardware with a Tesla truck. So we're doing what we did in cars. It's going to happen all over again. But two things to point out. One is that choice between open standards or closed vertically integrated. I fundamentally believe in open standards. Telecoms is all open standards based. That's why we're Zooming now, and this isn't really costing us very much, right? So, but in the beginning, those who were around in the 90s, you remember that things were like plug and play on your computer, and you'd plug in a webcam, and it was supposed to work, and it didn't, and you had to set jumpers. That's a little bit like where we are still with charging open standards. But that's going to change. That will get better. So manufacturers will get better at validating their firmware upgrades so that when they push out an update, it doesn't brick a system, as Kameale said, because that does happen today. That'll get better. And I do think that is the ticket to driving down cost long term. And I think the Europeans got it better, I think, in Europe, what they did with the CCS standard than what we did in the US. And then secondly, it's business model. The reason that a lot of this infrastructure out there for public charging for non-Tesla doesn't work is I led the acquisition of a company called Greenlots when I was at Shell. The model of this company was to sell chargers and software to third parties. So what would happen? They would sell it to a Dunkin' Donuts operator. Well, the Dunkin' Donuts operator, yeah, they were great. Put the charger in. Well, do you want to buy a maintenance contract? Well, not really, because that hurts my profitability. So what happens? That system no longer works. ChargePoint had the same model. So you had all these ChargePoint chargers out there that don't have maintenance contracts, that don't work. So that's a really important aspect of what we're seeing. In the fleet space, you can't do that. You can't have a FedEx driver, one of your customers, show up to a site and they can't charge. So there the business models need to innovate and support a better end-to-end overall transaction and performance. So that's very much what I believe in. That's what we've done at Prologis, and why I came to Prologis is because I mentioned that Greenlots technology sale. Most customers in the B2B space don't want to buy technology. They want to buy fuel. What do they buy today? Is diesel. So the future needs to look a little bit more like it does today. It was said before, too, about the hydrogen truck, about how drivers need to be able to kind of plug and play with this new technology. When we're selling a charging project to a customer, most of the time, if this is a 3PL, a logistics provider, their contract with their customer has just a fuel card. They pass through diesel cost. So if I can say, oh, instead of diesel, now you're buying an electron, it's like, perfect. I can just pass that on to my customer. It fits my business model. So it's really important to make things work kind of within that business model ecosystem and focus on, well, how within that can I make sure that you get a charge, right? And that performance isn't an issue.
Okay. Well, we are at time. Kameale, thank you so much for joining us. Henrik, we'll see you. Thank you so much. So I'm gonna